Please explain one more time that Xbox, the OG Xbox, is not Dreamcast 2.
It's not. Like, the only reason why people feel that way was because Sega put most of its games on Xbox. That was up until 2003. So what happened was Isawa Ogawa, the big homie at CRI, which was the parent company of Sega Enterprises, before he died on March 17, 2001, 2 weeks before the discontinuation of the Sega Dreamcast, he proposed to Microsoft, specifically Bill Gates, that he wanted the Xbox to be backwards compatible with the Dreamcast, and he turned him down. So the consolation prize was, we're going third party, and so, we're not going to have, we don't want Xbox to be backwards compatible with Dreamcast, and so he said, when we go third party, you guys will get most of the lineup, and that's just because, of course, Sony was largely the reason why, Sega was forced out the market. Well, that and the fact that it was 1994 when Soichiro Imagiri, took over Sega of America, briefly, and before, he handed the position off to Bernie Stoller, he fired Tom Kalinske because over the inventory for the Sega Genesis, And so that was ultimately why they went into the red in 1998. And so that's the reason why you always hear throughout the years, you always hear guys like, Peter Moore say, oh, it's Sega Japan is the reason why, this and that, whatever, like that. And I found that very peculiar that was the case until Imagiri himself, came forward and said that he had, so Imagiri came forward himself and said that, that he had fired Tom Kalinske because over inventory and, lack of revenue. So, and that was ultimately why, Sega America is the reason why Sega Enterprises went into the red in 1998 and they never recovered. So, really, Sega America is the reason why, ultimately, why Sega, had to exit the console business was because when they went into red in 1998, they tried to, when Bernie Stoller got on board during the summer of 96, and of course he killed the Saturn, outside Japan by saying, oh, hey, Saturn's not our future at E3 1997. That killed the Sega Saturn. And so the Sega Saturn, basically was unsupported outside Japan for 26 months. So that's pretty much a little over 2 years. So that's one of the reasons why Sony was able to get that 100 million, that record-breaking 100 million, plus, sales mark, because of that, because before, that record was held by Nintendo, because Nintendo had, sold 81 million, with the Famicom, NES. And, of course, they broke their own record, with the Wii, and so, but when that was going on, Bernie Stoller, when they told him, okay, hey, man, we got the Dreamcast and we're working on it, we got two teams. We have the 3DFX, Blue 3DFX working on, Project r.e.v.o. And then we got the NEC, Power VR2 guy working on, the Katana. Of course, they went with Katana, the Japanese one. And so then, Bernie Stoller, they told Bernie Stoller, hey, we need a Dreamcast B249. And because they wanted it to at least be profitable. And then Bernie Stoller said, nah, I'm going to put it at $199. And so he put it at $199, and that's what cost him his job. And so he fired him because, it was $199. And of course, it took off to a great, day one success, but, it didn't, there was no rocket fuel behind it. You know what I mean? So, and that's what that's what happened. And so, like, but yeah, Isawa Ogawa, yeah, the big homie. You know what I mean? He, before he passed away, he tried to propose to Microsoft, hey, can you make the Xbox backwards compatible with Dreamcast? And they told him no. And so they said, okay, well, all right, well, in consolation, I mean, it's funny because Nintendo was kind of like in a similar position. Well, not position, but in a similar situation with Rare. Because where, in Dean Takahashi's book, it was revealed that, Microsoft tried to buy Nintendo for $25 billion. But then, like, when word got to Hiroshi Yamauchi, who was the first big homie at Nintendo at the time, he turned him down. He said, okay, nah, what are you talking about? Nah, we ain't doing this. And so, like, Nintendo of America took it seriously. But, NCL, the main headquarters, Yamauchi said, nah, we ain't going with that. And so as a consolation prize, Nintendo sold its 49% stake in Rare to Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
And so Microsoft was able to buy Rare in 2002. And so, like, and then Sega, was like, okay, hey, it's, okay, well, you don't want us to be backwards compatible with the Dreamcast, but at the same time, let's, we'll give you 12 games, right? And so, of course, that only lasted until 2003, because this is the part in which, I need everybody who, especially don't know what they're talking about when it comes to this, needs to understand that deal between Sega and Microsoft was pretty brief. It didn't last that long, because that deal that they cut with Microsoft nearly killed Sega. You know what I mean? And that was the reason why Sega had to merge with Sammy in 2004. You know what I mean? Because they had to pivot. Because the Xbox, this is what a lot of motherfuckers don't want to admit, or they just wasn't there at the time.
Or they didn't know.
Or they didn't know. They wasn't there at the time. And here it is. Sega's games were of any publisher on Xbox. Sega's games were among the worst selling all time. As a matter of fact, the worst selling Xbox game of all time is Phantasy Star Episodes 1 and 2. That is the worst selling game of all time, in Xbox history. And it was as far as the first Xbox.
Yeah, the OG Xbox with the Duke controller.
Because they was like, well, because you had to pay for Xbox to even go online, and you had to pay, Sega, an additional membership, fee, whatever, to even play the game. So you had to pay double, and so that's why nobody was on board with that. You know what I mean? And so Phantasy Star Episodes 1 and 2, that was the worst selling game of all time. As far as an OG Xbox history. You know what I mean? Like Spike Out Extreme was a flop.
Oh my gosh, man, that game, man.
Can you imagine? And this is the thing about it, man. And just you can just go by history. Go by history. Go by the historical, right?
Right.
What Sega game to this day is the most prestigious? You know what I mean? As far as like value. You know what game that is?
What is?
Virtua.
Yep.
You know why? Because Virtua Fighter never debuted exclusively on Xbox. Okay?
Yep.
So because Virtua Fighter 4 went on PS2, Yu Suzuki was the one who made the call. You know what I mean? Peter Moore talked about it. You know what I mean? He said that Yu Suzuki was the one who made the call. He wanted the game on PS2. And that's why, Virtua Fighter has maintained that value and prestige. And then, the same thing again with Virtua Fighter 5. Virtua Fighter 5, it was exclusive on PS3. It sold way better on PS3. It came on Xbox 360.
It came out 360. Yeah,
it came out 360 later. Version C, it didn't do shit. Okay, and it by far sold much better on PS3. The numbers are there, and so And of course, the third time, right? Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown. What platform did it debut exclusively on? PS4, right? Did it lose its prestige? No, it maintained the prestige. Okay, and so that's what's always been the case. I mean, is that ever since Sega left the console business, they've always, as far as Virtua Fighter, it's always debuted first on PlayStation. And that's why it's maintained its value of prestige. Let's go to Sonic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dreamcast, GameCube. Okay. Now, when did Sonic? When did the Sonic community start to get weird? Right? Like meaning that they're all over the place. Right? You know when that happened? Sonic Heroes, 2004, when it went multi-platform.
Yeah,
okay?
It sure did. I was there. It sure did.
And so that's what happened, because before then, the industry wasn't talking crazy about Sonic like that. As a matter of fact, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, for example, on GameSpot, it got an 8.6. Okay, on Dreamcast. On the Dreamcast, it got an 8.6. So people weren't talking crazy about Sonic back then. It wasn't until Sonic Heroes came out that was when people started talking crazy about Sonic, because Sonic was, reintroduced to two new other platforms that were unfamiliar with, Sonic like that. The Sony, fan base, the Xbox, fan base, And so, whereas, that was one of Sega's biggest mistakes. I think that Sonic should have always had remained Nintendo exclusive. Sonic Heroes should have been exclusive on GameCube. It should have never been a multi-platform title. And so, Sega did not make that mistake with Virtua Fighter. It was mostly, for most of its time, after Sega left the business on March 31st, 2001, it was always exclusive first on PlayStation.
Sure did.
And that's why it maintained that value and that prestige. And so, so that's what happened. So in 2003, the deal between Sega and Microsoft, it was so horrible, it was so bad. None of their games sold on the Xbox. They had to pivot. And so they did a complete restructuring, and they said, okay, hey, from now on, the only two platforms we're really fucking with are Sony and Nintendo. And then in 2004, they merged with Sammy, and it became Sega Sammy. And
so explain to me why Sega, messing with Xbox after all that, and Xbox got the exclusive, premiere for Stranger Than Heaven.
It's a dumb deal, because history, those who don't learn from history, are doomed to repeat it.
Right.
And look at Sega's games now. They should be selling a lot better, but they're not, because they're fucking with Microsoft. They're fucking with Xbox. Because their games can be on State of Play. It can be. But they're not. Stranger in Heaven, nobody's gonna find. Luckily for them, Sega did the smart thing and they debuted the game first at the Game Awards.
Yeah, they did. They sure did.
So that's very smart. So, this deal, I'm pretty sure that was it. I think that was probably the last one. They're not gonna renew the deal with them.
So they're probably gonna just show trailers from PS5 shit, maybe 6.
Yeah, I think after this year, I think this is the last. This is the last. I think this is the last year. For this deal. I think that after this year, Sega's not going to be like that with Microsoft no more. It's basically contractual. They're like, okay, we signed this deal where, you're our marketing partner. It's like that. And I do believe that Microsoft did want to buy Sega at one point, but because
hell no.
But because of how disastrous the Activision Blizzard deal was, they had to pivot. And so, I think this is the last year. For those two, I think after that, Sega just needs to be like, hey, look at what these are doing. Look at Square Enix. Square Enix, when they decided to do that multi-platform shit, man, their business collapsed. Their business collapsed. So, I mean, so
we all know about that. But yeah, thank you for explaining that in detail.
So that's what happened. You know what I mean? It's just that people, when they look at Sega and Xbox, they don't want to talk about what happened after 2003. You know what I mean? That's always the thing about it. You know what I mean? It's like, oh yeah, it's kind of like it's like with everything here in America. You know what I mean? It's like people don't understand the concept of time. Like people, you know, don't realize that, for example, Jadakiss is still making music. You know what I mean? Or, you see what I'm saying?
Right.
They don't realize that, T.I. got a new album coming out. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's just people just remember things from where they were in time instead of updating themselves on what's going on now.
Right.
So, and that's, and like I said, and on that, you know what I mean? That's how you get old. That's how you get old, is by not updating yourself. Right. You know what I mean? So
I'm never getting old.
Yeah, you got to update yourself, man. I'm not saying that you got to like everything you see.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course not.